You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, it's me again, Steve Adams on Mighty Blue, and you are listening to the 346th episode of the podcast, Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. I may consider changing that subtitle, you know. I turned 70 last weekend, and thanks to all of you for your best wishes, by the way. But maybe we should be saying the ultimate end-life crisis instead of midlife. I had a wonderful time, and unbeknown to me, my Dana had organised for my best Brit friends, Richard and Wendy, to come and spend the birthday with me. They're still here, and we've got plenty of time together, on the beach and just hanging out. It has been wonderful. Today, our main guest is a returning guest. Mike Curran, or Energizer, hiked the PCT a couple of years ago and was my guest on our 252nd episode in January 2021. Well, at that time, he thought he was going to be a one and done. Yet there is something about having done a hike that never really goes away. You are inexplicably drawn back and you start reading about or watching videos about other trails. As you'll hear, Mike did just that and found himself drawn to the AT. He couldn't actually explain why at the time, yet he's worked it out on the hike itself this year. We'll hear from Mike in a moment. Also today, after the technical snafu that we had last week, we hear from the two gens at the main roadhouse. Our technical gremlins hadn't entirely disappeared, and we lost one of the gens pretty early on, yet I carried on with the other, and we'll be hearing from her after Mike. Then George Stavanos starts another long chapter, hiking with a kindred spirit who's putting in some long miles. George pushes himself to keep up, but to no avail. So let's hear now from our returning guest, Mike Curran, or Energizer. So our guest today is another returning guest. This is Mike Curran, or Energizer. Hey Mike, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's a great day.
It's always a great day, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah. You're a happy soul on the trail. Now, Mike did the PCT in 2020, and we had him on the show to tell us about his hike. But at that time, he had no great desire to do any other long hikes. But as I often say to people, if you go on another one, let me know. And Mike did. So what was it, Mike, that changed your mind about doing another long hike?
I don't know. I can't, I can't really say what it was. When I finished the Pacific Crest Trail and on my YouTube channel, Old Man and the PCT, I ended it with, I'm done. This is it, goodbye, everyone. And for the year following that, it just kept creeping into my mind that I needed to walk the Appalachian Trail. And I couldn't figure out why I needed to do it. It just started to formulate in my head to the point where last August, in August 2021, I finally told my wife, "Hey, I got to hike the AT." And so that's kind of how it started.
So you finished the PCT, and you had a fantastic experience on that. You had some really interesting adventures and so on, and you didn't want to do it anymore. But you say it kept creeping in. Were you sort of researching? Were you reading stuff to do with the AT, or it just kept intruding into your mind?
Oh, yeah. No, I didn't do any research on it or anything. I was trying to block it out of my mind. I had other things I wanted to do, and I was focused in on those, and I wasn't sure if I really wanted to do a long hike at all. But it just kept coming up. Hey, Mike, you need to walk the trail. You need to walk the trail. You need to walk the trail. And so, I finally told my wife, and the first thing she said is, she goes, I knew you would do it. And then she goes, ever since you told me about the Triple Crown, I knew you were going to hike the AT. And then she went on to say, and I know you're going to do the CDT. And then after that is when I really started doing research on the trail and thinking about the logistics and how would the Pacific Crest Trail or the Appalachian Trail differ from the Pacific Crest Trail. And so what did I need to do to get ready? But I had set in motion in my mind that I was going to do it before I really did research. I had done research previously, about a decade prior. I had read things about the Appalachian Trail. I did. Yeah. But it never generated a desire for me to do it. It was like, nah, that's not for me. The Pacific Crest Trail was always my love. I wanted to do it since I was in college back in the early 1980s and came across the trail, when I was walking in Desolation Wilderness up near Lake Tahoe. So that's always been the love. It wasn't any of the other trails, no desire. But then it kept creeping in, and that's how it started.
It's interesting, isn't it, how spouses and friends often know things before we do, don't they? So your wife has told you, even though you finished the AT now and the PCT, she's told you she thinks you can do the Triple Crown. And you still actually don't really want to do it, do you, the CDT?
Well, as it turns out, I didn't. Even when I finished the Appalachian Trail, it was like, man, this was a tough trail. I'm kind of done. And within, I think, a week of being home from hiking the Appalachian Trail, I started to look up things about the CDT. So I think I've succumbed to that. I've succumbed to the, earlier than it took the AT. I think I succumbed to the reasoning that, yes, I'm gonna do it at some point in the future. I don't know when. But I think I'm going to wind up on that trail.
Wow, amazing! And and this was a very interesting part of our conversation when we spoke initially to put this together the other day. You said that before you didn't know what it was actually about the AT that drew you to it until pretty close to the end.
Yes,
what was it?
Right.
So what was it that drew you there, and why? And how did you suddenly realize that that's what it was?
It took pretty much walking the entire trail for me to discover why I was hiking it. I knew I had to hike it. It was just in me, and it was going to happen. And I mean, you come up with your why of why you're walking the trail, and so you can get through every day. And I knew I would never quit. I've never quit anything in my life, so I knew I wasn't going to quit anytime. But I really needed to figure out why I was hiking the trail. What was it? And then it finally came to me towards the end. And I think anybody that hikes the Appalachian Trail knows this, that above everything else, the Appalachian Trail is America's trail. I mean, it is what McKay and Avery envisioned when they created the trail. I mean, they never thought through hiking would be a thing. It was a trail that was going to go from Georgia to Maine. But it was a people's trail. Everybody could hike it. You could get on it wherever you wanted, and you can walk through it. And when you walk the trail, it embodies America's history and our culture in every step. I mean, you start in the deep South, and you get to see things about the southern states and the people there and the small towns, and that takes you all the way into northern Maine, where you've got a whole different kind of culture, a whole different kind of people, but all Americans, and just great individuals, and you can just feel that as you're walking along, and the history just comes alive when you're walking the trail. And I think that's what I needed to realize, because I didn't appreciate that before. I did not realize that about the AT before. I mean, I fell in love with the Pacific Crest Trail, and because I've lived in the Sierra, and I love the mountains, and I love the West Coast, and I never appreciated what the AT would mean. I was always kind of, well, that's kind of a lowlander's trail, it's at 5,000 feet essentially, or even less than that. And it's wooded and deciduous, and, a green tunnel and all that kind of stuff. And so I really didn't find an attraction to it. Then a desire to hike it came about. Then the reasoning, and it's, I mean, I think that's why people do it again. Like you hiked the trail again. You did it twice because
who'd be crazy enough to do that?
Yeah, I know. It's like, God, who would ever do that again? But I think that's what drives people to the trail, and I think that's what when people do it multiple times, I think that's what, above all other trails, I think that is what the Appalachian Trail, brings to the table. Is America's trail.
So, were you? I understand why you love the idea of the PCT. That was your first love, and you went to that first, and you enjoyed that. Were you slightly dismissive of these 5,000 feet mountains in the east, or because, however, whatever they're like, you're still doing 3,000 and 4,000 foot climbs, aren't you? Quite often, so you still have huge climbs to do, but you start obviously at a lower level compared to ground sea level, don't you?
Yes, yeah, and that's one of the things is I did find on the Appalachian Trail, unlike the Pacific Crest Trail, when you're on the Pacific Crest Trail, nobody talks about other trails. I mean, they could care less. They're on their trail. But I found, particularly at the beginning, people love to talk about the Pacific Crest Trail when they were on the Appalachian Trail, and it'd be like, oh yeah, the Pacific Trail is much easier than the Appalachian Trail. It's for horses, old ladies and Girl Scouts. We'll walk it on our hands. But and it is true. The Appalachian Trail, the ups and downs are harder. Not so much the first 1,800 miles. I really didn't notice a big difference in the first 1,800 miles. But my God, yeah, you hit that. You hit the 1,800 mile mark when you hit the whites. And those last 400 miles, I mean, they beat you into submission, or at least they did me. So yeah, I mean, you definitely feel those ups and downs, and you get an appreciation for the toughness of the Appalachian Trail as a foot trail.
Which one did you find more difficult of the two?
For me, I found, well, see, that's hard. That's so hard to calculate because they're so different. I think the AT is harder doing one foot in front of the other. I think that is, when you walk every day, it's harder. I think everything else on the PCT is harder. So it just depended what you feel comfortable with. The navigation's harder on the PCT, the elevation, you're at a higher altitude. You've dealt with altitude sickness before in your endeavors, so you kind of have a feel for that, and that can hit you more on the PCT, obviously. Resupply is harder. My rucksack weighed more. For 800 miles on the AT, I didn't carry anything in my rucksack but snacks, because I knew I was going to go to a deli every day, or go to a restaurant, and I was going to pick up a meal. So my rucksack weighed a lot less. The weather wasn't as bad on the Appalachian Trail overall than it was on the Pacific Crest Trail.
Really? Hang on.
Oh yeah.
You had more. Hang on. You had more rain. Are you talking rain, or are you talking heat? What are you actually talking about?
I'm just talking. I'm talking overall weather. Weather that on. And it's funny because I would comment that, it wasn't so bad on the Appalachian Trail. And I had some people comment on my YouTube channel saying, well, you didn't have to deal with rain that much. And I went back and I actually watched some of my videos, because I produce them, but I don't watch them. I would put them out there, and then I'd move on to the next day. And so I went back and watched them. And about a third of the days I was on the Appalachian Trail, it rained on me. I just didn't make a big deal out of it. And I know that people can have pretty bad weather on the Appalachian Trail. Don't get me wrong. It can be pretty rough. But I started 1 May, and
that's right. That's the critical. I think that's the critical bit. Starting May, and apparently the traditional start date used to be 1st of April or sometime in April, and you started 1st of May, and you'd say you miss all that terrible cold weather early on, and you go pretty fast, don't you?
I missed the nasty. I mean, there's some nasty weather in March and April on the Appalachian Trail.
And February. My second one was February.
Start, that's some nasty weather that you can go through. And I missed all that. I started 1 May and I didn't hit any snow or anything else like that. I hit some rain days, but it was never cold. I didn't hit any cold days. And I had people comment that, oh man, you're going to die of the heat. And I know just from experience that I can handle heat a lot better than most. And so I knew that wasn't going to really be an issue with me. And I ended on the 13th of August. I hit Katahdin on the 13th of August. I know that it snowed on Mount Washington the middle of June, and it snowed on Mount Washington in the middle of September, you know, but I hit the sweet spot right in between there. You know, nice. I went through it. Whereas on the Pacific Crest Trail, you can hit triple digit heat in the desert pretty early, and you can hit freezing temperatures on the same day. You can be sleeping in the snow, and then in the morning, and then you can be by noon be in triple digit heat down in the valley in the desert. And I actually experienced part of that. And then when you go into the Sierra, even if it's a low snow year, just because of the timing, you're going to be walking through snow, you know, and so you have to navigate through it. You got to walk through it, and then I went through the 5 high passes with a group that we tried to do all 5 high passes in 3 days, which was pretty ambitious. And so by the last part of the day, we were post holing pretty bad because, you know, all the snow's soft. And I didn't have to deal with any of that on the Appalachian Trail. So,
I suppose it's a perspective, isn't it? It depends upon what you're looking at and what is difficult and what is not difficult. Yeah. And you're not a young man, are you?
Exactly.
I mean, you're nearly 60, I believe. Is that right?
That's right. I'm just about knocking on 60's door. Yeah.
And yet you still did this, as you say, in 3.5 months. Firstly, why the rush? And when you're hiking, do you take the time to sit there and just enjoy the moment?
Oh yeah. You know, that's the thing. And I heard another military person. I finished with another military person, B Cubed, and he's a retired colonel like me, and I think he said it best because he got the same, you know, comments where people said, "Hey, you're walking too fast. You're not really enjoying things." And he goes, "Well, it's pretty simple when you look at it. If you start hiking at 6 a.m. and you hike 12 hours a day at 2 miles an hour, you're not going fast at 2 miles an hour, but if you hike 12 hours and you close around 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, you can cover 24, 26 miles in a day and still be enjoying your time. You know, you're not missing things. What I would miss is, you know, a lot of hikers, and I don't fault it at all. I think it's just how people want to hike. A lot of hikers are kind of the 9 to 5 hikers. They get up, they kind of do their thing in the camp, and they enjoy, you know, making coffee and breakfast, and they kind of leave camp around 9 a.m. And then by 4 o'clock, they're back into, you know, the next shelter, and they're playing with their equipment and making dinner and that sort of thing. And that just wasn't the way I hike. So I missed that. I missed the campground experience. But I would be on the trail by 6 a.m. and there's animals on the trail early in the morning. And if you're not up, you miss them. And it's the same thing. There are animals on the trail after 5 o'clock that if you're in the camp, you miss them. You know, in fact, you know, I made this comment on one of my videos was I think the deer, I'd pass a bunch of deer between 6 o'clock and dusk. And I swear they would look at me going, "Hey, don't you know you're supposed to be in the camp by now? You know, didn't you read the brochure? This is our time." And so that's, you know, I never hiked fast. I always tell people I'm not a fast hiker, but I would just stay on the trail longer than most.
You hike long. You hike long, and you're right. A lot of people don't. I take ages to get out of camp. How you get out of camp at 6 o'clock in the morning, I would have to get up at 3 in the morning to get out of camp by 6. I mean, I was just I was a nightmare like that. But I saw something today, which is one of your videos, which I was fascinated by, and I want to talk about that now. It was the one about mental preparation, and the first thing you talk about is your physical training. That's quite extensive, isn't it? Tell us how you've trained physically.
Yeah, well, I just looked at it. Look, I mean, I'm getting older. I know that I used to compete in marathons and triathlons. And so as I got older, I realized my body just couldn't ramp up. I could not ramp up. And if you look at the statistics, people that start the AT, and I'm not saying they can't be done. I'm not saying it can't be done, but people that statistically, people get off the trail because of overuse injuries. They just haven't prepared, particularly older people. And so I didn't want to do all that pain and risk injury and risk breaking a bone, stress fracture, overuse injury on the trail. So I slowly ramped up. I took about 8 months to get ready for the trail, which is a lot better on the body than trying to do it within the first couple months while you're on the trail. So I just started. I already had a regime, so I just incorporated in my running. I started doing rucksack marches with a certain amount of weight in the backpack, and then I incorporated weight training with that because I've heard on podcasts that I've listened to where people recommend doing weight training, particularly as you're getting older. So I took that advice and I did a lot of weight training. And I knew I'd be going up some big hills when I was on the Appalachian Trail, up and down. Sure. And I wanted my legs to be ready for that. And I slowly did that over an 8-month period to where, as in the video you saw where it was a 3-day cycle that I would just repeat. I would get up and one day and I would run 2 to 3 hours. And it didn't matter how fast I was going, but I needed to run 2 or 3 hours and put that time on the legs. And the next day, I would ruck between 4 and 6 hours with a 30-pound rucksack. And then the next day I would do weight training and I would do 40 minutes on the stair stepper with the 30-pound ruck. And I would just keep repeating that. I just kept repeating that. So the body got used to, my body started to know, hey, you got 12 hours to recover because he's going to do it again. And so my body got used to me recovering every night and in being in that pace. And so that's why on the Appalachian Trail, I only took 3 zeros the whole time. Wow, and that's because I didn't need more days. I had prepared my body so it knew to recover.
So and that was interesting to me that for you, the physical preparation was the first part of your mental preparation. Which I hadn't actually thought of. I mean, I famously don't prepare for anything at all. I mean,
but you did for your last hike.
I did for Whitney because I was more concerned about the dehydration and the elevation and so on, but that didn't turn out to be a problem in the end. But you obviously worked really hard. What about your gear? Did you simply update your gear, or did you take the gear you'd had on the PCT, or did you need differences for the type of hike?
Combination of the two. The gear I liked on the Pacific Crest Trail, I just went with, and I didn't want to buy new gear if I'd already had what worked, and it was still in good shape. And then I evaluated how the Appalachian Trail was different than the Pacific Crest Trail. One example would be for the Pacific Crest Trail, I had a Western mountaineering 10-degree sleeping bag. Sure. And that's what I pretty much carried the whole way. And then on the Appalachian Trail, I used an Enlighten Equipment quilt 30-degree, and that lasted me the whole way. So I actually saved a pound just in that.
Starting in May, you can do that, can't you? A 30-degree bag. Yeah. You couldn't have. Well, I don't think you should take a 30-degree bag if you start in February, but starting in May probably wouldn't have been too bad at all. Yeah. One of the there are a number of different points of mental preparation. There's one thing where you just cribbed a bunch of lines from a movie that everybody said there can only be one thing, which is the why. But you told us you weren't terribly sure you knew exactly why until you got to the end. Or is your why different? So what why are we talking about? There can only be one thing.
Yeah. Like as you saw on the video, the mental preparation, you physically prepare, I dropped weight, and then you have to figure out what is the one why. I don't believe in lists. I don't think you can create a list and say, hey, these are the 10 reasons, and it's got to be integrated. It's got to be integrated why you're getting up. And I think for that, it was, I didn't know why I was on the trail. I knew I had to hike.
Sure.
And so the why for that was, Mike, you need to complete this trail in order to fulfill that desire inside you.
Right.
And I wouldn't feel complete if I had not done that. I would have felt, I think, empty. There would have been an empty piece in me. And for that, it required me to get up every day and hike the trail. And when I finished the trail, that desire, that emptiness was not there anymore. It was gone. And I was able to move on. I mean, I'm on my next trip right now with my wife, and I'm good with that. Whereas I think if people don't complete the trail and they still have that emptiness inside where, hey, I didn't hit Katahdin, and
that is incredibly strong. That is incredibly strong. And we've mentioned this recently in a few shows for some reason recently, that a lot of people, their biggest fear is not being able to complete it. Had you been, you're obviously such an achiever of things. Had you not been able to finish it, would you have been really dissatisfied with yourself, or just unhappy, or would you have had to go back there?
Well, I would have had to go back. There's no doubt about it. And it would depend on the circumstances of getting off the trail. You're taking 5 to 6 million steps. Let's face it, completing a thru-hike, there's a factor of luck.
Oh yeah,
you're just
definitely
lucky. I hiked with a guy that he hiked it in 2021, made it a certain amount of way, and wound up breaking his leg. Oh. And he was, his doctor sitting there going, "You ain't getting back on the trail." And he's like, "Yeah, I am." And of course, eventually he couldn't. I mean, his leg was too messed up. But he got back on the trail in 2022, and he started from the beginning, and he went through it. And so, I would have done the same thing. That was Orlando. He's in some of my videos. Just an incredible attitude that he knew he needed to finish it. And I think if that happened, I would have been okay with how it ended, but I knew I would have to get back on the trail.
Wow. Would you have gone back to the beginning? Would you go back if you'd broken your leg in, say, Connecticut? Would you have gone back to the beginning?
I would hate to say it, but yes. I hate to say it, and that's why when you get further down the road, I mean, I don't know if you felt it, but as you get further and further into your thru hike, you get more and more careful. Because you've got a lot more at risk. I mean, yeah, if you break your leg and at the 1,800 mile mark, geez.
That's another reason New Hampshire and Maine are so difficult, because you're especially letting yourself down by the roots of trees and so on. You could slip and fall at any moment in any of that 400 miles virtually, couldn't you? And that could be the end of your hike, just like that. And it would be it would be terrible. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the thing about, which I'd never heard before, the expression. I've heard the expression, "How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time." Yours was, you talked about never swallowing the watermelon, which was much more image rich, I think. So tell us about never swallowing the watermelon.
Well, I think that's why a lot of people quit mentally. They just quit mentally on the trail. Is they're walking and things are kind of hard for them, and they realize the last day was kind of hard for them. And then they try to envision doing the entire trail, and they try to mentally swallow all that hardship in one bite, and it's too much for them, and they quit. They like, "I can never do this. I just can't. I can't." So I never thought about more than what I was doing. I never thought about the next resupply or the next day, and people sit there and go, "Nah, you're not. That's, you're just joking." But seriously, when I like, and I'll give you an example. When I hit Four Pines Hostel, there's a convenience store there where just a couple miles from Four Pines Hostel, there's a convenience store, and they have burgers there where you can get burgers. And I'm sitting outside on one of the picnic tables eating a burger, and there's a couple thru hikers with me. And the lady thru hiker had to tell me that the next day we would be reaching McAfee's Knob.
That's right. That's right.
And she had to tell me it was called McAfee's Knob. I didn't even, to me, it was always just, well, that place everybody does the pictures.
Oh,
and so I was sitting there going, really? We hit McAfee's Knob tomorrow? Because I didn't even open the map and look that far out. To me, it was just, I needed to hike whatever it was to the Four Pines Hostel, and that was done. And then the next day I would deal with whatever comes.
In many cases, I kind of misunderstood the part of that then, because I hadn't realised quite how disciplined you were. And I was going to ask you, are you adaptable? But in fact, you're so disciplined that you're also so adaptable, aren't you then? Because you could all you look to face is where you are on that particular day and decide what you're going to do with that day, don't you?
Yeah, I would.
Other than allowing yourself, you may plan with your supplies how far you've got to go to get your next supply. But generally, you have that adaptability because you're saying so much in that moment, aren't you?
Right. And that's the thing is I would get up in the morning and I would start walking, and I didn't know where I would end that day. I had no idea. And I did a number of 30 plus mile days on the Appalachian Trail,
wow.
But I never planned one. I never woke up thinking, okay, I'm going to hike 30 miles today. It just whatever happened that day would cause me to go, okay, Mike, you need to walk further today. And that's just what you got to do. And it would come about.
Did you know that there was this little brown sign you stand on at the end of Katahdin, by the way? Oh, dear, that's hilarious. So would you say that you actually enjoy hiking, or is it the mission that appeals to you?
Well, both. I mean, I can't ignore the fact that I spent 30 years in the military, and if you come from that background, is just ingrained to be mission oriented, and there's something about not only doing a thru hike but training for a hike. It gives you a sense of purpose. So for 8 months before the hike, I had a sense of purpose every day that
Sure.
I was getting ready for something. Just like if you're training for a marathon, you complete a marathon in 3-4 hours, but your training is 5 months to get ready for it. So there's a sense of purpose, a sense of mission for that. But no, I enjoy the act of walking. I enjoy getting up and walking on the trail and seeing what I see. And to me, that is the magic of being on a thru hike, is just doing that. And
is the community important to you, or is it just the hike itself? Do you involve yourself, because you're going so relatively fast in terms of miles? Do you stay with much of the community? Are you with people for 3, 4, 5, 10, 12 days at a time?
Yeah, I wasn't around a lot of people on the Pacific Crest Trail, simply because I hiked it in 2020, and that was the COVID year. So there was only maybe 1,000 thru hikers on the entire PCT that year. So I really didn't get much of the community experience, the trail family experience, although I did get it for a few times, through the Sierra, and then in northern Washington and a couple other places. I had that feeling. And so that was but that was still kind of new to me on the Appalachian Trail. And even though I hiked faster than most on the trail, I wasn't the fastest on the trail. And there is a community of hikers on the trail that just seem to hike faster. So like for the first quarter of the trail, I did it with a young man, quick me, and we kind of hiked off and on together for the first quarter, and at the quarter way mark, he said, "Hey, we need to pick up the pace." And we had done the first quarter in 24 days, and he was like, "Hey, I need to pick up the pace," because he was a college student. He finished in 90 days. I mean, he was an absolute stud. But other people I hiked with were kind of the same way, and it's kind of a small community that hikes a little faster. There was Chandler, there was Margaritaville. I'm trying to think of all. I apologize. I'm trying to remember all the names. But
Try to remember the people who passed you.
Yeah. Zippy Morocco was there. Yeah, and some people did pass me, or I got an opportunity to hike with these people, Pocket Bagel, and other individuals that were hiking the trail a little faster than other individuals. And that really, I think it really came about when I was in the last part of the hike, the last 300-400 miles, and I just kind of found a groove with a group of individuals. And then I hiked with a section hiker for 250 miles, and she was just an absolute badass. I mean, she wanted to put on the serious trails. In fact, she was hiking with me because she injured her foot in Pennsylvania, and she wanted to hike slower. So she hiked with me to force herself to hike slower.
Oh my gosh!
And that was moonshine. And so I really enjoyed that on the Appalachian Trail. I enjoyed the community. I enjoyed getting up and seeing the same people. Orlando, I hiked off and on for the last 300 miles, and seeing him, Snoopy, Anonymous, and a number of people. But you can hike with somebody for an hour. You can hike with somebody for an hour and get a connection that it will last.
Sure.
It will. It will just, it will stay with you. And some of the individuals I met on the trail, I might have known just briefly, but they were, as you know, that experience is profound.
Absolutely.
And you share that experience with them. And so I really came to appreciate that on the Appalachian Trail. And maybe that's on the Pacific Crest Trail in other years. I just didn't have that on the year I had.
All right. So, last question. Did you take away different things from the two hikes? Or are they each a mission that you've accomplished? Or are there things you found within yourself that came differently from the two hikes?
Yeah, both hikes. Well, the PCT, as I said, was a life goal.
Sure.
And so I took away completing a life goal, and the beauty of the Pacific Crest Trail, that will stay with me forever. So I took away that. For the Appalachian Trail, I think the history and the culture and what that trail means to America, I took that away. And I took away the camaraderie I felt with the thru-hikers that I did have
Sure.
the privilege of hiking with. I took that away. As far as personal growth from it, I think it was the same for both of them. Obviously, with the second one, it's you already developed that confidence. You've already done one, so you have the confidence.
Sure.
So I think it's less profound.
You sounded confident last time, Mike. After your first one, yeah, you sounded like you were on that mission. You knew what that mission was, and you were going to get it done. You got it done. That was great. But look, I'm so pleased I asked you to come back on, and I really appreciate you sharing this part of the story. Of course, now we need to have the Triple Crown one. So whenever you do the CDT, you need to let me know again, and we'll go through that, and we'll talk about how that's different, because I'm going to be interested what your favourite of them all is at the end. It may well still be the PCT, but we'll talk about that when you do it. Any idea when you might be doing the CDT then?
It all depends on what goes on. There's things I want to still do with the wife. I've mentioned I've got a 42-foot blue water cruising sailboat, and my wife and I are hoping to put it in the water next summer. And so that might take up next summer. But depending on what happens back at the house, my wife is involved in activities back at the house, and depending on what she is required to do, it may come next year, it may come the year after. But my wife's already told me it's going to happen, so that means it's going to happen.
What's that thing in Mission Impossible? Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is the CDT.
Well, that's people have already said, "Hey, Mike, don't forget us." But make sure you capture that hike as well.
Absolutely. Okay, man. Well, lovely to see you again. You look so well and so happy, and I'm so pleased that you enjoyed our side of outside the country as well as the other side. All right. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Really good seeing you.
Cheers, man.
Cheers.
Bye. He's a determined fellow, isn't he? And what a training regimen. I couldn't do that. He's ex-military, so I guess he's always had that kind of mentality. He really seems to approach his hikes like a mission, and clearly he's going to achieve that mission. It's some mindset, but probably perfect for a long-distance hike. I have no doubt that we'll be hearing about his CDT thru-hike before too long. Now, after my appeal for more men in my Mighty Blue class of 2023, guess what? We got a fourth woman. Happily, a few days later, a couple of guys joined in, so we're now up to 6. If I haven't got back to you yet, and I think I owe 3 of you a call or an email, let me just tell you that you made it. I'll be emailing you very soon. But I'd still like 1 or 2 more, so if you're heading north, south, or flip-flopping in 2023, let me hear from you. Cheers. Now, let's hear about a hostel that wasn't in business when I was hiking the AT in 2019. These are the 2 gens from the main roadhouse, though, as you'll hear, they quickly become a single gen pretty quickly. Here they are. Today we're kind of resuming a conversation we tried to have last week. This is Jen Kent and Jen Mastraccio from the main roadhouse. Hey ladies, how are you?
Good, how are you?
We're doing good. Happy Halloween, everyone.
Well, happy Halloween to everybody as well. And 2 days ago was my 70th birthday, which is
happy birthday.
It was kind of terrifying, but I've got over it by now already. And you're on because we're doing this little series about different hostels, and I didn't experience the main roader. So tell us a little bit about it and how you set up and where actually you are.
So we are located. Our trailhead pickup is at ME27, which is in between the Bigelows and the Crockers. Mm-hmm. This year, our mileage point going north was 2006.1.
So when did this all happen? When did you get started with the roadhouse?
Say we moved to Maine just over 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. We'd been hearing about this property for a really long time. I had through a family friend, and we decided why not take a crazy leap of faith and go check out this property. We'd both just turned 50. And we needed an adventure in our life, and a bed and breakfast is what I'd always wanted, and we wound up getting a hostel, which we have fallen in love with.
So what have you fallen in love with, the people or the place?
For me, it's both. I would say the hiking community is a pretty amazing community. It was surprising to us how amazing it brings out a really good side of humanity, the hiking community, how everyone's there to help each other and support one another through the trail angels, the hostel owners, the hikers themselves. And, living in remote Western Maine has been definitely a change, but it is a beautiful place to be.
Yeah, I'm sure. And funny enough, don't you wish that could translate back to when people go back to so-called real life? Because, I think that's one of the many reasons people have a problem when they reintegrate into real life. They've been so nice to each other on the trail, haven't they? And they suddenly go back to a world which is a little bit tougher to live in.
So, I think that's definitely part of the problem with people relocating back into the real world is, there is such kindness on trail. Literally, people are like, I lost my trekking pole. They're like, here, I have an extra part. Let me help you out. And if people really did that in everyday life, we'd be living in a much better society.
And when you decided to set up what you thought might be a bed and breakfast, was it always intended to be for hikers? And how did you start putting the word out?
So yes, this house has been a hostel. It has a history of being a hostel. It was a logging hostel for so long, and then Susan Critchlow, who had it, she was a thru-hiker, and she ran it as a hostel. So the intent after meeting her was to reopen it for the hikers. And how it started was my son sat up at the trailhead doing trail magic, and said, "You really should go check out this new hostel my mom and her friend just opened." And so our very first guests were Skeletor and Joseph, one going north and one going south. Nice. And that's how the word spread. Literally, we went from 2 people to 22 people to 25 people in 7 days.
Oh my gosh! So you sent your son to hustle at the trailhead. Excellent.
Absolutely.
Nice bit of marketing. Quite right too. So how close actually is it to the trailhead, and how do people get to you?
We do on-demand shuttles when people call us from the trailhead. It's about a 15-minute drive. I'd say we're about just shy of 10 miles from the trailhead.
Oh, really? Quite that far
Yeah.
away? Okay. And when you reopened it in 2021, what were those early days like? You said you got your son to bring people in. Were you trying to work out what people needed, or do you think you already had a good take on what people needed because you spoke to Sue?
I think it was a combination of the two. I would say we were definitely trial by fire, learning as we were going. I think one of the good things is we listen really well. So we listened to what the needs were and we adjusted accordingly. Certain things we did just based on what would we want if we went out camping for the weekend? Like what little nice things would we want to have available? So we made sure, Q-tips are here and nail clippers and lotion and all the things that you wouldn't want to necessarily carry with you, but you would want when you came in for a rest. Nice.
So what sort of accommodations do you provide right now?
Well, right now we have our hostel has 16 bunk beds, 5 private rooms. We do the shuttles to town. We do the shuttles to the trailhead. We provide, the only thing we charge extra for is breakfast, and that changes kind of on the daily. I can't cook the same thing every day.
Right. Oh, right. That makes it easy, doesn't it? Crikey. So, in that case, tell us what breakfast is then.
Yeah, so breakfast varies. So if we have an abundance of tomatoes in the garden, we'll do breakfast tacos with homemade salsa. We do all the beans, the cilantro rice. Or it could be banana bread pancakes and scrambled eggs with bacon and hash brown casserole.
Wow. So you've had people obviously through in 2022, you had a full season in 2022. Your takeaways similar to what they were last year? Or is it the same type of person, or do still some people stand out to you in your mind this year?
I think we definitely had some people stand out. You always get some that you get a little closer to, especially the ones that we tend to be a bit of a vortex place when people get here.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
It's not uncommon for people to stay for 3 or more nights here.
Hang on. Why do you think that is? I've got my own thoughts. So I know because Shannon, Joy, Shannon Finn said that it was such a warm and welcoming place. I can see why it would be a vortex, but why do you think it is?
I think part of it is, we've actually had some well-grown men come to us and say, you guys are like being home, like your mom. And so we get that a lot. I think part of it is that we're mothers, and so we tend to really take care of them like we would our children.
Right.
And I think the second thing is that for the folks going north, they're realizing, holy cow, I just hit 2,000 miles. Yeah. And my adventure is almost over. Right? I might want to just slow down for a minute and kind of absorb it all. And we're a pretty comfy place to do that. Yeah.
I think to find somewhere where you're comfortable, it is a tempting thing not to go back into the woods for a short period of time. And I think, if you can provide that for people, that's great. So when they get to your hostel and they go to the bunk room, what do you provide in there? What's available for them? Because I know what I would need, and I know 1 or 2 things that I saw on the Camino de Santiago, I think would have done well on Appalachian Trail hostels. So you tell me, what do you provide there?
Well, so we were very fortunate that one of my really good friends is an incredible builder, and he came up and custom built our bunks for us. Right, so our bunks provide a lot of privacy for a bunk room. Right, we have privacy curtains. Each bunk has 2 outlets in it. It has a light fixture. We have twin extra long mattresses. We went with the 10-inch memory foam, and he built everything 8 feet long. So there's room for your So
that's real long.
So it's like a little shelf. There's a room for your pack, for your phone, for everything. So you can really spread out. And if you sit on our bunk bed on the bottom bunk, you're not going to hit your head.
All right. So what are you going to do going forward? Is this something that you're going to continue to grow, or you've got the numbers you like now? Because some places definitely grow too much and they can get a little bit crazy at times. Is this a good number for you, or do you think you might start accommodating more in the future?
No, I think that we're both comfortable with the number that we can have here. We've had people ask if we will do tenting. We're not allowed to do it. And we've also discussed that we could, attempt to get a permit for it. But it just really changes the experience for people who are inside. Because we still have, X amount of toilets, one washer dryer, and it would just really change the experience for everybody. And we like that people have a good experience here.
Right. You allow mail drops, obviously. Well, I say obviously, but I know it's more and more of the thing that they do. You allow mail drops. So
Absolutely.
Where can people actually find you when they're starting to plan their hike for next year? Because, one of the difficulties is always you don't know when you're going to be at a certain place. I know people like the idea of putting everything down the spreadsheet and trying to stick to it, but my experience is that most people tear up their spreadsheet on day 2. So yours is a week by week, day by day basis almost, isn't it? Do people just find you on Far Out and then call you on the day?
So we have some people who do try to plan a little bit more, and they will call in advance. But for the most part, we are actually officially now in Far Out. That just happened this week. As a waypoint, yes. So they just give us a call, and we put them in the book.
So, it's just a matter of interest. Why did it take you nearly a season and a half to get into Far Out?
Last year when we opened, we were so new to everything, and like I said, we went from the 2 people to 25 people in the 7 days. We were afraid to get in Far Out, honestly.
Really? Why?
We were already overwhelmed. We really thought we were going to slow roll into this whole thing.
Right.
Take our time, kind of learn the whole thing. And we didn't understand word of mouth on the trail. And so we didn't have backup sheets. We had loaner clothes, but we didn't have 50 sets of loaner clothes. Oh, right. So we were literally running around, washing laundry as fast as we could, remaking beds, telling people, hey, we promise you'll have a blanket before bedtime. We're washing it while we're running to the trailhead. And I think we feel like if we would have been in Far Out last year, it would have completely overwhelmed us.
Oh, well, so in that case, that's probably a pretty good way to sort of, as you say, ease yourself into it. I've got to tell you, just from a personal experience, and I don't want to go into it too much, but I can tell you that some people do accept skirts as loaner clothes, and that's men as well, because I did once, because there was nothing else for me to wear that fitted me, so I put a skirt on, and I felt very strangely comfortable for about 6 hours wearing a skirt. So guys will wear anything when they're on the trail. Yes,
we've been told we have a pretty decent loaner clothes closet. And we do have dresses specifically that we had when we purchased in mind for the gentlemen. They like to wear their town dresses every now and then.
It's so weird. I'm kind of shuddering thinking about it, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Well, look, you've got a website as well, haven't you? I understand.
No, we haven't gotten that far yet.
Oh, you haven't? So where are you? On Facebook and things?
Facebook and Instagram. Right. And then, you did ask about expansion. So the one thing that we did do is we are taking over the Stratton Motel.
Oh, cool.
Which is directly in town.
Yeah.
So we'll have that for our in-town option and kind of as our hub for when we do town runs. So we take everybody into town in our short bus. They can congregate at the motel instead of sitting outside. So they'll have an air-conditioned place with Wi-Fi.
Right. So they go in there. Hang on. They go in there, but do some stay there as well?
Yes.
So how many are going to? So on a single night, between the 2 places, how many can you accommodate then?
If we would be at maximum capacity at both places, I think it's 50 people.
Oh my gosh. Wow, I bet you're welcome. I bet you're welcome. Everybody wanted you there. And one thing you mentioned earlier on, I didn't follow up on. You said you need a permit to do camping. Is that all throughout Maine, or because it's certainly not all throughout the trail?
No, it's certain. So especially up here, it's by township.
Oh right.
And what the township will allow.
Right. And you think they won't allow it for you?
Sue, who had it before, she tried to get a permit, and they said no.
Right. Oh, interesting. And frankly, as you just said, you don't really want to because you say it will change the experience. So I kind of understand that, yeah. Okay, well, look, I wish you well, and I apologise for the technical stuff. And I think we've lost one of the gens, unless she's come back again. But I appreciate you talking with us, and I wish you so well in the next season as well.
Thank you so much. We appreciate being on the show, and happy belated birthday.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Cheers, then. Bye.
Cheers.
That rustling, by the way, was apparently Jen's dog nuzzling up to her throughout our conversation. Sounds like a great place, though, doesn't it? I'll have their links in the show notes. Check them out. I'm actually putting this show together on a Monday, so we've only had a few more donations since last week's show. But thanks go to monthly donors Justin Mullins, Kevin Eastman, and Ann Dobson. We'd really appreciate your support. You can help out if you feel that we brighten your week somewhat by going to the Hiking Radio Network website and clicking on one of the many donate buttons you're going to find there. Thanks again. Finally today, George Stephanos is into the Blue Ridge Mountains and the multiple parkway crossings. Yep, you crossed that road many times. I'll see you next week. Chapter 9. Tear Down the Wall. Cloverdale, Virginia to Waynesboro, Virginia. Saturday, the 25th of June, 1983, mile 722.2. Last night was one of the more pleasant interludes I had enjoyed in a long while. I had a couple of long conversations with the folks back home and spent the rest of the night laughing and joking with Alan. He's one of the good people and has obvious fine taste in register reading material. It feels good to be hanging out again with someone I like, for a little while. I cannot even attempt to keep his gruelling daily pace just now if my shins ever are to heal. I can still grind out respectable mileage, but one 20-mile day after another is out of the question for the immediate future. I didn't go to bed until midnight, but first thing in the morning I was up and on my way to the post office. The walk was a fascinating journey through a microcosm of America in the late 20th century. Cloverdale was a community in transition, slowly and awkwardly transforming from a rural backwater to a chunk of not-so-small town suburbia. The motel at which we stayed was on US 11, just over the line from Cloverdale in the neighbouring town of Hollins. This broad grey river of churning diesel trucks and endless streams of automobiles coursed through the outskirts of the town, ironically its most heavily built-up section. It was a vein of urban sprawl connecting the city of Roanoke to Interstate 81, knifing through sleepy farms and the quiet little neighbourhoods which were the real heart of Cloverdale. An anonymous piece of four-lane blacktop indistinguishable from hundreds of other such strips across America, stores, motels, small businesses and factories. Gas stations and restaurants sprouted towering signs to lure highway-hypnotised motorists off from the interstate. Turning off US 11, I strode into an earlier time. The post office was about a mile off that noisy thoroughfare on a small two-lane byway just across a strip of railroad tracks amid a cluster of small, tidy homes with green lawns and flower gardens. Welcome to Cloverdale. I mailed my mutilated boots home and filled out a change of address forwarding my Montebello supply package to Waynesboro. On the way back to my room, I stopped at the local hardware store for some Coleman fuel for my stove. They were all sold out of the stuff. That could lead to serious problems unless I find some in one of the 3 small general stores located near the trail between Cloverdale and Waynesboro. My remaining fuel will never stretch as far as Waynesboro. I picked up breakfast at the grocery store across the road from my motel, finished loading my backpack and sat down to my meal, a pint of strawberry ice cream and a 16-ounce Coke. They say that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, after all. Alan had left town very early this morning. He would be waiting for me 17 miles up the AT at Boblett's Gap Shelter, if I made it that far. I myself had hoped for an early start, but the morning was sprouting long grey whiskers by the time I started walking US 11 back towards the Appalachian Trail. It was more than 2 miles from the motel to the AT. That explains why that mile seemed so long to me yesterday. A small misunderstanding with the data book. It had listed the distance to the nearest motel, but we had gone on a bit further to stay at a place which has special significance to Alan. Several years ago, he tried to thru-hike the AT and was forced to drop out. When we reached Cloverdale, he had a strong desire to stay at the motel where he spent that bitter night of defeat. Being a man who understands a bit of personal demons myself, I agreed. When I reached the AT, the first 2.5 miles were an uphill roadwalk which I completed in 45 minutes. That helped me to partially atone for my late start. Picking up the roadwalk under the I-81 overpass near the sprawling truck stops on US 220, I soon found myself drifting back into the Virginia to which I had grown accustomed on this journey, following rural lanes past rolling pastures, barns, silos, and a few small clusters of residences. The mass of Big Tinker Mountain rose above the fields behind me, and the long grey line of the Blue Ridge loomed ahead. The trail entered the forest, and the next 7 miles were a quiet woodland hike to the base of the Blue Ridge. Soon I was having lunch at Wilson Creek Shelter. It was a rather late lunch, 3 o'clock, but not too late considering my delayed start. I decided to hike on another 8 miles and meet Alan at Boblett's Gap. The next 3 miles were an easy climb to the crest of the Blue Ridge, a mountain chain I had not encountered since the eventful early days of my journey in southern North Carolina and Georgia. I'd been on the western fork of the Blue Ridge as recently as the Virginia Highlands, but it's the eastern fork which carries that name officially once they diverge. At Black Horse Gap, I reached the ridge crest and had my first encounter with the Blue Ridge Parkway, An experience repeated several times this afternoon. This portion of the chain was restricted to a single string of mountains with broad valleys on either side and no major spur ridges. Thus, the Appalachian Trail was constantly crossing or running alongside of the road. The parkway was a thin strip of two-lane blacktop with grassy shoulders snaking through forests along the ridgecrest. The only development I encountered along it was 3 scenic turnouts crossed by the trail. The first one I passed, Taylor Mountain Overlook, was typical of the experience. The crest was very narrow, just wide enough for the road and a small paved parking area, and the spot commanded sweeping views of the valleys on either side of the Blue Ridge. It was a good hike. The only drawback was the many contortions through which the trail went in order to avoid even more frequent contact with the parkway, often dropping a short distance down off the crest and climbing over small wooded knobs which the road skirted. On the other hand, the 3 overlooks provided me with terrific photo opportunities and trash cans. Apparently, it would not be necessary to carry around much garbage in my pack for a while. The Appalachian Trail parallels the Blue Ridge Parkway and its extension, Skyline Drive, for the next 220 miles, all the way up to and through Shenandoah National Park. I coasted into Boblett's Gap Shelter at 8 o'clock. Today's trail grading and footway have been a major improvement compared to the previous 100 or so miles, and my body was once again showing an amazing resilience in its ability to quickly shake off seemingly crippling injuries. Its condition is not yet back to 100%, but it's much closer than perhaps I deserve, considering the giddy recklessness with which I hurl it into adventures like the stormy dash across Paris Mountain. The forests have been quite attractive since Cloverdale. Many of those through which the AT passed in the Alleghenies, north of Mount Rogers, has seen heavy lumbering in the recent past, resulting in profusions of weeds and young trees crowded together in dense tangles. The trail through those snarled jungles was difficult to keep cleared and often felt claustrophobic. Conversely, this portion of the Blue Ridge seems to have gone a long time without cutting. I walked beneath stands of tall, stately giants along a wide, clear path through lush green carpets of ferns and little else. The shade of that high forest canopy prevented the growth of the wild, chaotic jungles of underbrush which I found in those younger woodlands. Alan had been waiting here since 3 o'clock. I hope he goes on ahead soon. I enjoy his company, but the knowledge of how badly I was holding him back would haunt me. Sooner or later he'll be compelled to resign himself to hiking alone for a while, until he runs into someone who wants to keep his impressive pace. One final note. At Wilson Creek Shelter this morning, Alan met that weird little fellow who was going to hike all those 25 to 30 mile days. He was packing it in. Sunday, the 26th of June 1983, mile 739.1. I have a confession to make. Scum that I am, while travelling with another hiker, I usually manage to let them get out onto the trail before me each morning, when the path is spanned by immense spider webs spun during the preceding night. They are quite effective snares. Unless the sun happens to be striking them at just the right angle, you never see them until you're scraping big clumps of gunk off your face and out of your hair. I like to let the other guy have the privilege of experiencing that wonderful sensation. I started hiking this morning at 7:30, about a half hour after Alan left. The initial 2.5 miles to Bear Wallow Gap followed the same narrow ridge the Appalachian Trail and the Parkway had shared yesterday. Once again, I was closely paralleling the road, often hiking just above or below it. While still wiping the sleep from my eyes, I passed the severed head of a recently slain rattlesnake. Some hiker had done the deed and left a note on the trail pointing out the grisly trophy for the edification of those who followed. At Bear Wallow Gap, 2 narrow strips of state blacktop rising from the valleys on either side met at the ridge crest. The Appalachian Trail, which had been following a wide, overgrown woods road, came out of the woods and passed beneath a bridge carrying the Blue Ridge Parkway over the state road, a graceful stone arch adorned with ivy. The exit and entrance ramp islands were manicured lawns, sprinkled with flowering dogwood trees. Nice conception. Re-entering the woods, the AT left the parkway and the main crest behind it for a while, following a spur ridge called Cove Mountain. The pathway was, as it has been since Cloverdale, beautifully graded and cleared of obstructions. I was making excellent time when I stopped for a quick break at Cove Mountain Shelter along the crest of the mountain. In the register was a note for me from Alan. He had slain the serpent. He wrote that if I could get my butt in gear and catch up to him 3 miles ahead of Jennings Creek, he would supply the stove and snake fillets if I would contribute some of the squeezed margarine I carry in my backpack. I was mildly intrigued, but not wildly enthusiastic. By the time I finished nursing my shins down the long descent to Jennings Creek, Alan had been there for about an hour. He had a protein-induced glaze in his eyes, looking as contented as the backpacker who had just swallowed the reptile. The snake was all gone, as he had managed to weasel some butter off a passing motorist. Oh, darn. He showed me the 15 rattles he had taken as a souvenir and reminisced fondly about his recent repast. I think he said it tasted kind of like chicken. The bank of the creek was a nice temporary haven from the rigours of late June backpacking. The AT had descended into a deep valley, cradled among some outlying spurs of the Blue Ridge, coming out on a narrow road and following it over a concrete bridge across the stream. The valley and its surrounding ridges luxuriated in cool, lush forests of hemlock, pine, oak, hickory and dogwood. Cheerful rapids churned the rocky creek bed above the bridge, and a tranquil trout pool, sheltered by an enormous, partially submerged boulder and gravel banks, lay below. We took a long, giggly break at that spot. Too long, as it turned out. I could barely get my engine restarted on the climb up Fort Mountain which followed. The thermometer was topping 90 again for what feels like the zillionth consecutive day. Alan, dizziness and nausea were my companions on that climb. Finally, 3 of us had to sit down for 15 minutes and tell Alan to go on ahead. He was also looking somewhat wobbly, but he didn't wish to stop. One day out of Cloverdale, his own personal demons were just a little too close for comfort. I felt much improved when I resumed hiking. The trail quickly arrived at Fort Mountain's summit and began to descend. At the bottom of that climb was an AT campsite which boasted the first good drinking water I had seen since leaving Boblett's Gap this morning. Having stretched 1 quart for 12 steamy miles, I was understandably dehydrated. I stopped and guzzled many cups of Tang before going on. The next 4 miles were all climb, a very discouraging prospect at the end of a long, hot day. Nevertheless, I made the best of it. I'm becoming conditioned to making long climbs while drenched in my own sweat. I cannot remember my last dry one. The trail was nicely cleared and well tended, but steep in spots. The ascent ended at the summit of Floyd Mountain, returning to the main crest. Since Bear Wallow Gap, I had descended almost all the way to the floor of the adjacent James River Valley and subsequently reclimbed the Blue Ridge. The Appalachian Trail will do tricks like that frequently in the days just ahead. More contortions to avoid the parkway. It should be interesting. Wanting nothing more than to simply get home for the night, I sailed over the final half-mile descent to Cornelius Creek Shelter. The location was ideal. A tiny clearing secluded with an impenetrable thicket of rhododendron beneath a towering spread of well-spaced hemlock and oaks alongside a shallow, trickling stream in a very rocky bed. Alan had left me a note in the register to the effect that 17 miles were just not enough for him, and he was going on. It was enough for me. It was 6:30 and my stomach was rattling a tin cup against the bars of its cell, screaming for dinner. I wish Alan good luck against his demons. I hope he has his moment in the sun on Katahdin. He deserves it. It takes an awful lot of guts to do what he's doing. I'm now only 31 miles shy of my required 14-mile-per-day pace. I should be able to breeze into that magic number soon, even if my leg does not come around. I'm shooting for at least 17 more miles tomorrow. I'm hurting, but I have my own demons to put to rest. I want my moment in the sun too. 1,399.4 miles to go.